Okay, if we could, we'll get started this evening. This is the June 14th, 2018 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan. I am the chairman of the commission. I'd like to remind all the commission members and those in the audience, if you would, to please silence your electronic devices. For the commission members, I'd like to remind you to please turn your microphones on when speaking. Speak into the microphones clearly, as we are being recorded, and that way everyone in the audience can hear us as well. For those that come up and testify, if you would, please come forward at the appropriate times. State your name and address for the record, and then once again speak into that microphone so we can hear you as well as those in the audience. And once again, it is being recorded. Next, we will start with introductions. I don't believe our council liaison is here this evening, so we will start down there.
Michelle Mahoney.
Mike Lester.
Jack Deacon.
Ann Stropman, city staff.
Chris Yarnell.
Bunny Tricky Cotton.
Thanks, Vote.
Dean Dutoy.
Blake Marcus.
Shane Wade, city staff.
Eric Barron, city staff.
Ian Zollinger, city staff.
Sonny Sanders, city staff.
Brian Wolford, city staff.
Anna Naniski, city staff.
All right. For everyone on the commission, we do have a new city staff member today. So Anna, if you'd like, maybe give the commission a little bit of information about yourself, what you're going to be doing for the city, if you will be attending our meetings and things like that. So go ahead.
Yeah. Hi again. I'm originally from Kansas City, Missouri. I just received my master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Iowa. I'm really excited to be back here in Missouri, closer to family and friends. I will be more in long-range planning, like Ian is in current planning, so I will be attending these meetings. Thanks. Awesome. We're glad to have you on board and welcome you to Jefferson City, and look forward to seeing you here when we have our commission meeting. So thank you. Mr. Vaughn has just showed up, so Dale Vaughn is here, and we have all of our commission members here. So we'll move forward. The city code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of a regular member. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to conduct business. I do declare that we do have a quorum. Is there any members tonight that are going to be disqualifying themselves from any of the agenda items? Bunny, I think.
I'm going to excuse myself after the first
Okay.
item.
Okay. Is there any other members this evening that would be disqualifying themselves from any of the agenda items? Okay. So the following regular members are absent, which is none, and the only absentee we do have tonight is Matthew Hall, who is an alternate. So the voting regular members will be Bunny Tricky Cotton for just the first case, Jack Deacon, Dean Dutoy, Michael Lester, Michelle Mahoney, Blake Marcus, Dale Vaughn, and Chris Yarnell. Hank, you will be able to participate in all of the meeting discussions and all that, but you will not be voting this evening. You can't vote on the second? I'm wrong. You can vote on the second case. Okay. Yeah. Until we reorder, I'll just let it go with that. Okay. Next, we will have a call for cases. If there is someone here to present that case, if you would just raise your hand so we know that there's someone here. The first case is case number P18014. It's a recreation of the School Street Local Historic District. Thank you, ma'am. Next is case number P18015. It is a final subdivision plat of Turtle Creek Subdivision, Section 2. Thank you, sir. Have we received any continuances for any of the cases this evening?
No.
Okay. I do believe we have received a request, and I'm sure it's from city staff, to reorder the agenda. Staff wishes to reorder the agenda to hear case P18015, the final subdivision plat of Turtle Creek Section 2 first.
Yes.
Okay. Brian, do we need to vote on that reordering of the agenda at this point?
If you would please, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We have a request from city staff to reorder the agenda. Is there any discussion? If there's not, I will entertain a motion.
Move to reorder the agenda per requested from city staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries, we gotta put a number in there, don't we? 8-0. Next, we have the format of the hearing and order of testimony. Ian, if you would, please fill us in on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the commission. The proceedings of the meeting are being recorded, so please step forward to the microphone when you speak and give your name and address for the record. The standard of order for each case is as follows. After introduction of the request by city staff, the applicant and their consultants will provide information on the request. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes unless additional time is granted by the commission. The applicant shall have 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if requested. We will then ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will then ask to hear from opponents of the request, and then we will then ask to hear from anyone who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes each unless additional time is granted by the commission. City staff will then make their recommendations on the request. In order to reduce the time necessary to hear the application, reference to printed material, including staff reports, applicable findings, shall not be read into the record unless directed by the commission. The commission will close testimony from the floor. The commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive, that is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will be taken with ayes in favor, nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the results of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. Following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: the City Code of the City of Jefferson as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of applications under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, the affidavit of publication to the affidavit of publication of the public notice in the newspaper, copies of drawings, plans, and or renderings under consideration, letters or memoranda from staff, staff reports, minutes of proceedings, correspondence or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, rules of procedure for the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protective Services or through the Office of the City Clerk. Please be advised that any items that are presented, distributed, or otherwise received pertaining to these cases under consideration become the property of the Commission. This includes any photographs, drawings, petitions, and letters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Next, we'll move on to the adoption of the agenda. I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as reordered.
Move to adopt the agenda as reordered.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The adoption carries 8-0. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Ann was nice enough to get our minutes for our regular meeting of May 10th, 2018. She's provided those to us, so when the commission is ready, we will entertain a motion.
Would make a motion we approve the minutes from May 10th of 2018.
Second that motion.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. We do have some communication for case number P18014. City staff has provided that. I'm going to pause for just a minute to let the commission members look through that, and just here in a minute, we will continue on. So if the commission would, please read through the correspondence. We'll give it one more minute, and then we'll continue on. Okay, if everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and continue on. I would like to interject here, our council liaison has arrived. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, sir, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you so much. Carlos Graham, council liaison to this commission.
Thank you, Carlos. I'd also like to announce that if there's anyone in the audience that would like to use this first microphone here, if the podium is too high or for disability reasons or whatever, you're welcome to sit at that first chair there and use that microphone. Please make sure that there is a button on the microphone that it's turned on. Mr. Graham may be able to assist in that if we need to turn that on. So with that, we will move on to All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to other new business and start our open cases. Our first case tonight is case number P18015. It is the final subdivision plat of Turtle Creek, Section 2. Ian, would you tell us a little bit about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The proposal for approval of a final subdivision plat consists of 16 acres. The property is zoned RS2 and is intended to be the final phase of Turtle Creek development. This is the last phase. The location of this plat, the nearest major intersection is here at the intersection of West Edgewood and Fairgrounds and South Country Club. The subdivision is over here. The Section 2 is what is for approval here tonight. The highlighted section here. The preliminary plat for Turtle Creek Section 2 was brought before the Planning and Zoning Commission back in August 2016, and I've provided a picture of it here for your reference. There are some minor adjustments from the preliminary plat that I would like to point out to you. This is the preliminary plat here, and these three areas have some minor adjustments. The final plat, as pictured here, I like to point those out. Here, this is Reserve Tract B. Reserve Tract B is not an individual lot, this right here, but is intended to be transferred to the owners of Lot 20 of the first section here. So that is a minor adjustment from the preliminary plat. Here, there are two flag lots that have been created, a minor rearrangement of lot lines. These flag lots meet the requirements in city code. And lastly, lot 48 here is going to be dedicated to the city of Jefferson for the maintenance of a stormwater basin. As was stated before, the zoning of the property is RS2, and all lots meet the minimum lot size as required by that zoning district. Those are the minor adjustments from the preliminary plat to the final plat, and I would be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant's consultant is here as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Ian or other city staff at this point? Okay. Next, we will move on. If there's someone here who would like to present this case, if you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. I would like to re-announce that city staff mentioned in their presentation early on. We're going to give you 3 minutes. That's our code requirement. I'll be timing you. But when we get to about 2 minutes, I'll remind you if you're still at it. We will give a little bit of variance in there when necessary, but we just want to try to be fair to everybody in the testimony and the length of this meeting this evening. So
I will be happy to keep this short.
Mr. Chair, if I can interject, the applicant, when they're presenting, is allowed 10 minutes to speak.
Okay.
And then any public comments, that is those for or against or who just want to speak, they are limited to the 3 minutes.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
I'm going to keep it at 3 minutes.
All right. I've got you down for 3.
And I do appreciate the reordering of the agenda.
Yep. Thank you. Name and address for the record, please.
Paul Sampson, Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street. As Ian said, this is Section 2 of Turtle Creek subdivision. Section 1 was platted almost 2 years ago, and in that time, the 39 lots that were in that first section have pretty much sold out and for the most part been constructed on. So Mr. Jim Loggy, who is the developer and home builder in the subdivision, has asked us to come forward with the final subdivision plat for Section 2. Again, there are 41 lots in this section of the subdivision. There will be an extension of the existing main street through the subdivision, which is Tan Man Court, and there will be 2 additional streets that will be constructed. Ronan Court, and Ryder Court. All three of these streets will be ended in a cul-de-sac. Tanman and Ryder both have extensions of right-of-way that go to the property line, which would permit future extension onto adjacent properties if in the future development in those areas is needed to help provide some connectivity between neighborhoods. With the street extensions, they're being built to a width that would permit parking on one side of all the streets, and along that we will also be constructing sidewalks on one side of the street. Utilities will be extended throughout the subdivision. Water lines, fire hydrants, street lights will all be constructed as required in city code. In speaking with Mr. Loggy, I think his intention is most likely to actually construct the improvements in two separate phases. So the first phase of that would be Ronan Court, which would be the first cul-de-sac that's at the bottom of the drawing that's on the screen. It would be on the right-hand side of the exhibit that I handed out prior to the meeting. So that would be likely constructed this summer until those lots are sold, and then he would move over to Ryder Court and finish out the remainder of the subdivision at that point. I will note that, as Ian said, Lot 48 is will be dedicated to the city of Jefferson for maintenance of a stormwater quality basin, which basically takes all the runoff from the subdivision, puts it through the basin, and holds it, allows sediment and pollutants to settle out into the basin, and produces a cleaner runoff from the development. I think that is really all the highlights. If anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? I might have two for you.
Sure.
What was the thought process for creating the flag lots of 80 and 75?
Well, it wound up whenever we looked at the final plat of this, and if you go back to the preliminary, we had some fairly large lots that were kind of in that back corner of the subdivision, kind of squared off in a little bit of a funny manner. So in order to try to square up some of the lots, make them more uniform, and I think our lot total might have gone up by two. So we were able to squeeze a couple extra lots in the back of that by creating those flag lots.
And if my memory serves me right, Section 1 actually had some flag lots in it as well.
That's
didn't it?
correct.
Yep.
Yep. Kind of for the same reason.
Yep.
Trying to make the streets work with the topography, and sometimes that leaves odd, funny spaces behind the streets. So in order to most utilize the property, we were able to add a couple of flag lots in there to.
Was there a detention basin in Section 1?
There was a separate detention basin or stormwater quality basin in Section 1. Seems to be functioning very well. All the construction runoff goes through there, and we set those up so that during construction we've got silt fence and silt barriers in those. It really keeps the sediment that leaves the site down.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Yep. Well, that is what Ian had referred to as Reserve Tract B. What that is there's a lot 20 in Section 1. When the gentleman there built a house, he built a covered porch on the back of the house and was unaware that covered porches count as setback. So as you measure from the back of the covered porch to the property line was less than the required 20-foot or 25-foot rear setback. So since he already had his house built, Mr. Loggy decided to create this reserve tract that he would then deed that to that property owner rather than make him take his roof off his covered porch.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request if so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. I will now close testimony. Ian, if you would give us your staff report, please.
The final subdivision plat meets the requirements of the subdivision plats as outlined within the subdivision code. The street network provides for future connectivity options to neighborhood properties. Staff recommends approval of the plat documents subject to correction of minor technical edits, minor technical details identified by city staff.
Shane, do you have anything for us this evening?
The only thing I'd like to add, I think Paul covered the infrastructure quite well. There are proposed cluster mailboxes at all the ends of the cul-de-sacs. I believe the one on Tan Man Court is at the in front of Lot 48, which is the stormwater quality basin. So there's been a ramp and sidewalk provided for those access points for the mail routes or the mailboxes. And we would also concur in terms of approval, subject to the plat and plans having technical corrections addressed on them as well. I have the plat and had transmitted those comments back to Central Missouri Professional Services, and where plans should be forthcoming in the next day or so.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for city staff? I'm assuming the applicant has no issues with the correspondence about changes and technical corrections?
I've had a chance to look at them, but I can't.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I think next we need to move on to a motion. So if one of the commission members would entertain a motion.
Move to approve the final subdivision plat of Turtle Creek Subdivision Section 2, subject to the comments and technical corrections of the Planning and Engineering Division.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries 8-0. It will be forwarded on to the city council. Ian, can you give me a date of when this will go to the city council, please?
Yes. July 16th.
July 16th,
Yes.
6:30 p.m. this room?
6 p.m.
All right. Once again, it is a public meeting, and anyone who wishes to come and testify or discuss it is welcome to come.
Actually, as a subdivision plat, it's not a public hearing in front of the city council, but there is an opportunity on council agendas to comment on any matter.
Okay. Good enough? All right. Next, we'll move on to our second case. Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, before we start on this, I would like to know why this is coming before planning and zoning. I mean, the question's been asked to me 2 or 3 times. I've gone through all the data that we have, and I can see nowhere in there that this has anything to do with zoning. So if
We were going to address that in the presentation.
okay, before we got really started on it, because I hate to layer one more piece of bureaucracy on these people who've fought and fought and fought, and I guess I should quiet.
That was my 10-minute timer.
I'll be quiet.
Yeah, let's open that case up. Let city staff tell us what they know. If you have any further questions, we'll move on from there. Bunny, are you going to excuse yourself at this point? Okay, we'll note that Bunny's leaving. Hank, I believe now you can vote on this case. With that being said, we will continue on to our case number P18014, the creation of School Street Local Historic District. Eric, you're going to do this one.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, tell us a little bit about it, please.
And so it is a number of odd things that have been coming in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission lately. Last month, it was a sidewalk deferral appeal. This month, it is a historic district application, so certainly apologize for sending such odd items in front of you. But so the reason this request is coming before you is largely because the law department has told us that it needs to. That the powers that that the cities are authorized through state statute to regulate design standards, which is the primary purpose of historic districts, are rooted in zoning. And therefore, the proposal needs to go through a public process in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for two reasons. One, to flush out any public comments, in such on such a land use type of decision, but also to remove the give a little bit more, how do I put it? To remove the potential for legal challenge because it was not brought before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so that would be an unfortunate scenario if, after all the hard work that people have done to get this proposal up to this level and getting it adopted through the city, for someone to challenge it because it did not go through a proper procedure through a Planning and Zoning Commission review and public hearing. And so to ensure that that situation does not occur, the law department has recommended that the matter come in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body. They are not a decision-making body on this matter. And so the recommendations of this body proceed on to the City Council, along with the recommendations of the Historic Preservation Commission, who have already acted on the matter, to the City Council. And the City Council is the final determining body for this application, this proposal. So I have a fairly lengthy presentation to give on this case, but first wanted to point out the contents of the meeting packets. It is a fairly large meeting packet. I hope you haven't had an opportunity to review the various items contained within it. There's a table of contents on the first page. The packet includes a staff report, some location maps, the staff report in front of Historic Preservation Commission, and the minutes of that meeting. They were the unapproved minutes as they were put in the packet, but those minutes have been approved at their meeting last night, Tuesday evening. And the various application materials associated with this, including the application form, signatures of the various property owners, because it is multiple property owners that have signed the application, a narrative laying out the history of the area, maps and photos of houses, the proposed design guidelines that are associated with historic designation, and then also our standard mailing list that showing that we've mailed letters to both property owners located within the district and property owners within 185 feet of the proposed district in accordance with state law. And the correspondence that we had received up to that point. And also, I believe there's been additional correspondence submitted and has been handed out to you this evening. You've had an opportunity to review that. We've also included a packet of supplementary information, some correspondence relating to floodplain communications, and I will address that at a point within the presentation. And so that has been handed out to you as well. And so I've actually laid out an agenda for this presentation. First, I was going to touch on city code allowances. So this is a very rare item to come in front of you, a historic district, and there's other similar types of districts. And so to lay out the different tiers of districts that are available, tools that are available for historic preservation and design guidelines. Also, the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission in this matter, some of the details behind the application, a timeline for how this application has been processed. So there's been a number of different meetings to lay that out for you. The proposed design guidelines, to touch on some of the details there. What the approval process for building permits would be if the district is approved. The floodplain has been a major topic in relation to this proposal, and so to touch on that topic as well. a bit on the staff analysis, and then go into the public hearing for the matter. And so first, the code allowances for local historic districts. The primary purpose of a local historic district is to regulate the building design in the interest of preserving historical character. And so there are a number of different tools that were established. This was put into the city code back in 1998 as kind of a three-tiered structure where there were different levels of kind of historic designation, with the higher levels having more regulation associated with them. So those three levels were the Conservation Advisory District, which was just that. It was basically just a recommendations on how to deal with building design in the area with no real regulation there. The second is the Conservation Plan District. That was an item that had actual regulations on how buildings could be designed, but those regulations were reviewed and approved at the administrative level after being adopted by, through a process. So review of proposals in that area would be at a staff level rather than in front of a design review board or anything. And then the full-blown historic district. And so that is the highest level of tool available for this purpose. And it involves a design review board in the form of the Historic Preservation Commission, where anyone who's looking at doing a change on the outside facade of their building or any kind of new building project within there would have to go in front of that body for approval of the design of that. In 2006, the code was amended, and the first two items in that three-tiered structure, were removed and replaced with a single item in the zoning code, and that was the neighborhood conservation section of the zoning code. That was done largely in response to the Central East Side Neighborhood Plan, which had a number of recommendations on using conservation overlay districts in order to regulate design, building design in the Central East Side. And that has been pursued in the form of the Capitol Avenue Overlay District. That is a form of the Conservation Overlay District that is contained within the zoning code. To address a little bit more Mr. Deacon's question on why is this before you, well, it turns out that historic districts, when you look at the at other cities and the way their codes are structured, it is quite common for historic districts to be that the details and regulation of those to be laid out in the zoning code. For those reasons, because the powers are largely derived from the chapter of the state statutes that relate to zoning. So the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission, fairly simple, to conduct a public hearing. That is an important thing in order to get comment on this land use matter from the public. Then also review and recommendation on the application to the City Council. The Commission has a number of different options available to it when making a recommendation to the City Council. The standard rules of procedure for the Commission are that all motions are to be positive, but the Commission can make a positive recommendation, a negative recommendation by voting against the positive one. They could propose, make a motion for a neutral recommendation, send a neutral recommendation to the City Council. They could also send any other recommendation or a longer descriptive recommendation if there's something more specific that believe the City Council needs to consider. You have those abilities. So the application has gone through a number of significant dates. But the first one, which I do not have on the screen, we actually conducted a neighborhood informational session. It is a fairly complex matter to establish design requirements, within an area, and so felt it proper to invite the property owners of the area to make sure that they understand what that consists of. And that meeting was held on April 19th. And then on May 1st, held a public hearing and consideration of this application in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. They voted to approve the formation of the district and also approve the design guidelines that are associated with it. And so then the next meeting is the one we are at, the review and public hearing at the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then after this commission, it would proceed to the city council for a similar public hearing and final decision. We have that date tentatively scheduled for July 16th. If there's no delays or anything, that's the date that the public hearing would be in front of the city council. And so some of the application details. Again, a full copy of the application is contained within your packets. There are a total of 28 properties contained in the area, and I'll flip to a map here in a second. 22 of the property owners within the area have signed the application. And so there's a threshold for formation of a local historic district of 75% of the property owners must sign an application for it to be brought forward for consideration. So they have met that threshold. The application has two parts. The first is the narrative, describing the history of the area, and the second is the proposed design guidelines. So up on the screen is a location map of the area. It's generally the city block located southwest of the intersection of Lafayette and East McCarty Street, between that intersection and Wears Creek, but does include a couple properties on the other side of Lafayette, so 3 houses on the east side of Lafayette, and then also 1 house on the south side of Miller Street. And so the proposed design guidelines, which again are contained in your packet, I've kind of broken up the description of those into 3 parts. The first dealing with existing buildings. So if someone was looking at doing an addition or some sort of modification to the exterior of their existing building, these design guidelines would be in effect. And then the next dealing with new buildings. So if someone is going to construct a new structure. And then the third is various site features, so things that are really unassociated with the building but deal with the property still. And so the purpose of the design guidelines are meant to be a guide for reviewing building proposals by the Historic Preservation Commission. Again, they would be acting as a design review board. So what's contained within the design guidelines are not hard and fast rules. They're guidelines to be used by the commission when considering building proposals. And after I go through the description of the guidelines, I'll touch on the process on how that would occur. And so first, of course, there are a lot of words up on the screen there, but I've tried to bullet point out some of the major features within the design guidelines. Again, this is really for the existing buildings first. It encourages, of course, rehabilitation over replacement of exterior features, so trying to fix what is there rather than replace it. If there does have to be replacement, make sure that replacement is compatible in terms of the historic architecture of the area. The painting of brick exteriors is heavily discouraged. Windows and doors need to be retained in their historic character. Trim, again, kind of in the same character. Existing roof form, so the pitch and design of roofs needs to be same as the main structure, basically, if there's an addition or something. Existing porches retained if possible. We've found that a lot of times one of the first things to go on a house, on an older home, is the porch, and so trying to retain those porches is important. Sometimes they cannot be retained. In that case, of course, replacing them in a similar appearance is the preference. Trying to locate any mechanical or utility boxes on the side or rear facades to keep them away, not visible from the front. Those very modern kind of features of homes these days. And building additions, ideally on the side or rear structures. With the street front side, if there is to be something facing the street, to have the same exterior appearance as the main building. And then also, make sure that if there is an addition to a building, it's kind of the same scale as the existing. And so for new construction, again, kind of keeping with the historic character of the area, designing buildings to draw on the common characteristics of the area. So in other words, looking around to see the design of the buildings and designing a new building so that it's compatible. And making sure that the scale of that building is appropriate for the area. It's not something that's overly large or small compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Making sure that the building's oriented to the street with a door and windows facing the street and a porch. Making sure the setback is along the existing build line, the heights and such being similar, windows, roof pitches. The exterior finish of brick is really the primary material in that area. And no garage doors facing the street. Incorporating some architectural design into the facade of the buildings, and retaining some of the landscaping features, and making sure that the site just is compatible with the area. And then the design elements, again, just trying to keep things consistent with the area, and then some site requirements. Again, I've already mentioned setbacks, but making sure that the front yard is not paved, like be a parking lot or something, that driveways go to the side of buildings, and that the landscaping features are consistent with the area. So these are all just kind of standard historic design guidelines that the document is really crafted on, and moving. Just pointing out, to some of the staff analysis that these design guidelines are fairly standard for a historic district. And so how would building permits be processed if this district is approved? So basically any new construction or exterior modifications would be subject to review by the Historic Preservation Commission. So there's a bit of a disconnect in that many types of activity on the exterior of a building do not necessarily require a building permit. That is a fairly recent decision that was made associated with adoption of the 2015 IBC building codes. That there was a body formed to review that, through the city, the Building Regulations Division. One of the recommendations that they made and was approved was that building permits not be required for the exterior envelope of a house. So if someone's looking at putting on siding on a house or something, there's no building permit required for that. So there's a bit of a disconnect between a lot of the things that are contained within these design guidelines required, basically, if this historic district is approved, and that connection to a building permit. And so it's likely that there would have to be a slight modification to city code in order to address that. Because it's very clear that the purpose of the district is to implement the design guidelines, and that if someone's looking at doing one of these changes to the exterior envelope of a building, that they would be subject to a review process through the Historic Preservation Commission. So the way they would do that is they would submit some building plans. This could be drawings showing what it is they're proposing to do to the exterior of their building. Those plans would be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission at a meeting. They would either approve them or deny them. Then after that decision, the building permit would either be issued or rejected based on that decision. And the approval and denial of those plans would be based on the design guideline document.
Eric, are you, do you want to finish your presentation before we ask any questions, or as we go through? Myself, I just came up with a question that I have regarding the exterior facades. Do you want us to hold those till you're done and then ask the questions, or kind of hit as we go through?
This is a pretty good break. I'd be happy to answer any questions up to this point before going into floodplain issues.
Okay. Well, let's do that. I'll open up the floor then. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Eric or other city staff regarding any of the items that he's outlined so far? Go ahead, Chris.
Question. So, as far as the historical proposed design guidelines, that would be part of the city's job, I guess, to review. If anybody wanted to do like any exterior work, that would be the city's job in order to approve or not approve those repairs.
Yes, it would be city staff's job to administer these design guidelines and the processes associated with them. It would be the Historic Preservation's job to review them and either approve or deny them.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense.
You made the comment, if I understood correctly, that anything on the exterior did not require a building permit? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
I might be oversimplifying that, but in generally that's correct.
If I decide I'm going to put a porch on the front of one of these structures, does that require a building permit?
Yes, that's actual structure. That's
okay.
not.
I wanted to understand that in my.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Eric, my question was, when you mentioned that the current code does not require a building permit for certain things on the exterior facade of a property, Ms. Sharonell's example was putting on a porch. Yes, that requires a permit. My question is, if a homeowner is in a district, historic district or special use district, let's go with historic district at this point, and their property is currently painted whatever, green, and they want to paint it red, when you are in a historic district or this historic district, if approved, they would have to get a permit for that?
Not for paint or paint color. There's no color requirements that are built into the design guidelines. The one exception to that is if someone was going to paint brick. So the design guidelines specifically call out that brick should not be painted. So my interpretation would be, should a property owner want to paint brick, that they would need to seek approval for that. They need to justify it, basically, in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. If they wanted to paint any other, non-brick or masonry, part of the structure, there's really nothing governing that, and so they'd be free to do so.
When you say brick, you also went back and said masonry. Are we talking about rock, stone,
Yeah,
things like
brick,
that?
rock, stone, all that stuff.
Okay. My next question was, if a historic or special district is approved by the city at some point, city council's approval and all that, is there any kind of deed restriction that is put on those properties so that as they're transferred and sold, given to other family members or whatever, that someone is aware of that?
And so the way that is addressed, so the way basically the public becomes aware of this district is it gets shown on the zoning map. At least that's how other cities largely do it, and would be our recommendation basically, as it, if approved by the city council, that it be identified on the zoning map as being designated a local historic district. That is where that would get flushed out when someone's researching the purchasing of a property. And so no, not by deed restriction, but by zoning map.
So your answer is no.
Not by deed restriction, no.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Back to the permitting process. If they wanted to cover the siding with vinyl, or if they want to put a tin roof on where they normally had some of the modern type tin, would that have to go through a permitting process?
And so I believe the material of the roof is contained within the design guidelines. And then, yes, certainly the exterior appearance. So, yes, that would have to come in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. Because I believe that both of those would kind of be contradictory to.
Well, the wood siding, and they just cover it up with fake wood siding. I mean, it's almost like covering up with paint. But hopefully that would be governed by a permitting process.
Correct. Okay. It is a very restrictive district. So,
Mr. Chairman, may I add that the exterior covering does not require a building permit per se. It would still have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission.
I have a question. So, if someone were to make improvements to their property without going through the Historic Preservation Commission, what is the recourse?
It would be a violation of the city code, so it would be under the purview of city code enforcement, as well as any civil remedies that the adjoining property owners would have against that property owner.
Any other questions for city staff at this point? All right, Eric, if you'd proceed.
And so a large portion of this area, the proposed district, is located within within the floodplain. And so I've outlined the boundaries of the district there in yellow and laid them on top of a floodplain map. And so the floodplain maps, there's basically four different floodplain districts, so to speak, level of floodplain zones, I believe is what they're referred to, that are contained on this map, and I'll point out each one. The first one is what's referred to as the floodway. And so this is a crosshatched area. If you look on the screen, it follows that line right there and is crosshatched white. The floodway is the area where basically water would be expected to be flowing during a high water event. The next is the usually referred to as the 100-year floodplain, and so this is the teal line or the blue line located right there, and everything that's polka dotted within there. So there's the 100-year floodplain. That is the area that is regulated. So the floodway is very heavily regulated, and then the polka dotted area is regulated in terms of structures that are located within them or subject to floodplain regulations. And I'll touch on that here in just a minute. The next area is this black line. And so that's the, and then polka dotted black, and there it's just outside the 100-year floodplain. That is the 500-year floodplain, or what it's usually referred to as. And then the fourth zone is everywhere else that is not subject to floodplain regulations at all. So the 500-year floodplain is shown. It's largely for informational purposes. It's not regulated in accordance with the various floodplain regulations. So it's really the 100-year floodplain is the item that's at most concern when speaking of floodplain regulations, as well as the floodway. And so a large item of discussion surrounding this proposal is its relationship to floodplain regulations. Oh.
Eric, I think we...
Just a comment.
Okay.
I've seen maps of the peak of the 93 flooding, and I also understand that this area was not flooded in 93.
Okay, and I think I can touch on that a little bit. Just because it did not flood in 93 is not necessarily what is modeled with this map. And I'm a little bit out of my my area when speaking about floodplain regulations. I'll do my best to present this to you. But my understanding is that the computer models that the federal government uses in order to create these maps, that this area is really shown because it basically what it's modeled off of is a very heavy rain event located in the watershed upstream from it, not a backup event from the Missouri River. So this is not Missouri River floodplain. This is a floodplain associated with the creek and the water that would flow through that area in a very heavy rain event. So.
Okay. I understand that. My understanding is the area has not flooded before either, but ever.
Yeah. And yeah, and I would rely on some of our floodplain expert, to address those. And
If I could ask, Mr. Brown?
Jack, we're not going to start that.
Okay.
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 Let's let
But
city
they
staff.
live along there.
Yeah, I understand, but let's let city staff do their presentation, and then we'll ask questions when we get to it. Thank you. Eric, please proceed.
okay, regardless of the question of whether it did or did not, or will not flood, it is shown as floodplain on the federal maps, and so is subject to those regulations. And so there are a lot of regulations associated with floodplain, but there's one in particular that is an item of concern when it comes to historic districts. And I'll do my best to present this to you, but at the end of this presentation, basically, we have a lot of unanswered questions in this regard. So the federal floodplain regulations basically only allow improvements of a structure, existing structure that's located within a floodplain, of up to 50% of that structure's value. It's referred to as the substantial improvement clause. And so it's there to ensure that there's not a overly large investment that's being put into a flood-prone area that is only going to be flooded out at some future date. Okay, and so it is a fundamental thing that's located within floodplain regulations. Those are federal regulations. Now, also within federal regulations is a provision for elimination of that substantial improvement requirement for contributing structures that are located within a certified historic district. Okay? We do not know at the staff level if this district would qualify as a certified historic district under that clause that allows for elimination of the substantial improvement clause. We have tried to seek clarification on this item, and our efforts have been unfruitful. Within the supplementary information that was passed out to you is 2 items of correspondence I felt noteworthy enough to pass out to you to give you an idea on where we stand on that matter. The first is some email correspondence that basically refers to certified historic districts as that maybe this would not be that. We've sought to try to clarify that in the form of the second item of correspondence, which is a request to the State Historic Preservation Office for a legal opinion on this matter. So in the end, we are uncertain. We have no information, any evidence that designation of this area as historic district would actually remove that 50% substantial improvement clause, and that is the best that I can present to you this evening. We're trying to seek clarification on that, but we have no evidence that it would actually apply.
Eric, my question would be, is the 50% substantial improvement rule, is that based on value prior to construction or after construction?
And so it's based on the structure's value, so it's ignoring the value of the property that it's on, and it is prior to construction. So for example, a $100,000 home could have $50,000 of improvements placed into it, so it would become a $150,000 home, and it has maxed out its substantial improvement. Any other improvements would not be permitted under those regulations.
So you're telling me it's a one-time substantial improvement rule? So then what I'm getting at is, if this is approved, or even if it's not approved, at this point, you'd still be in the floodplain by the maps, by the government, federal government. So if the structure, not the land and the structure is worth $100,000 prior to construction, they could put up to another $50,000 in that property. So now the structure is worth potentially 150, let's say, for argument's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they are not allowed to come back and ask for another substantial improvement? Or is there a waiting period?
Over a 10-year period. I'm a little out of my realm when dealing with the floodplain regulations.
Chris.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding, according to Don Fontana, is, let's say year 1, it's worth $100,000. Over a 10-year period, you can put in up to 50% of the value of the house. So if you did a $25,000 improvement in year 1, the clock would tick, and you could put another $25,000 improvement in it up to year 10. Now, after year 10, I don't know how the math works, but I would assume you would then have a $150,000 house that it could start over again.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. May I also make, Mr. Chairman, and that applies to any structures that are considered below the base flood elevation plus 1 foot is what we regulate too. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Pre-existing homes.
Yeah, so if there is a structure that is located above that base flood elevation, then this is not applicable, or more than 1 foot above that base flood elevation, or if a structure is elevated up to that level, are not contained within the floodplain at all. So.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. We ready to move? Nope. Another question.
Just one more point of clarification. It's the value of the structure. So if a piece of property, the building and the land, let's say, would have sold for $100,000, some portion of that is the structure, some portion of that is the land. If the land is, say, worth $50,000 and the structure's worth $50,000, they can only put $25,000 worth of improvement on that. So it's not what the property would have sold for, it's what someone determines the value of the actual structure is.
That is correct.
Okay,
Yeah, appraised value. So often it's an appraiser that determines that value.
okay. So it's a very small amount of money available for improvements then, every 10 years. Okay, thank you.
I have a question, and it may be a sunny question. Is that based on the appraised value or the assessed value?
I believe that's the appraised value. The assessed values are normally a little bit lower than actually what the market value would be.
I know they used to say it was the assessed value. That's why I was asking.
Sonny, in my tenure, I think that if someone did not want to get an appraisal, you could use the assessed value. If someone wanted to, go with getting a professional appraisal done, then they could use that value. But once they came up with an appraised value, you use that period, even if it was lower than the assessed value. But I believe that was the history I have on it, just for clarification. Any other comments for city staff at this point? I'll let them continue on. Eric, please continue.
I think I'm to the point where of the recommendation. So there's a staff report contained within your packet. It's a fairly lengthy staff report. It's a fairly complex issue. So there is a negative staff recommendation on this proposal. It's laid out within the staff report. It's largely based on two areas of concern. The first is concern about the floodplain regulations, and the second is concern about the tool that's being used in order to achieve the design incorporation of design guidelines for the area. And so first, I'll touch on each of those. And first, the statement is that staff are uncomfortable with the number of times that relief from floodplain regulations have been referenced within discussions and testimony associated with this application. It seems like it's almost got more attention than formation of the district, that the floodplain regulations are the important thing here. We fear that there is an expectation that approval of this historic district will result in relief from substantial improvement regulations, and we have no evidence that that is accurate. And so that is the first item of concern that's built into the staff recommendation. The second is that staff believe that the tools available for preservation of historic areas, the historic district is an unnecessarily complex tool in this instance. It is the most powerful tool that the city has in this regard, and that a more appropriate method of preserving the architectural character of this area in this instance is the Conservation Overlay District. The Conservation Overlay District was the tool that was used for the Capitol Avenue area. Of course, there was a lot of discussion and interest in preserving the historical and architectural character of that area. And that tool has been put in place and is in effect. The mechanics of that tool rely on basically building proposals coming in front of city staff for review rather than going in front of a design review board. So it's a little bit easier for property owners to work under that system than it is to have to appear in front of a body to seek approval of their building project. It is also carries a heavy administrative burden associated with administering a very complex district such as this. And so building proposals would have to be processed by the city. And then also, questions and property transfers may give rise to questions, associated with this historic district being on the property and the design guidelines and requirements for building proposals within it. I believe that the negative staff recommendation outlined in the staff report has been interpreted by many of the public to be a contradiction of the finding of historic significance by the Historic Preservation Commission, and that is not accurate. The findings of historic significance by the Historic Preservation Commission should be recognized by this body. They are the body that are assigned such responsibilities by the City Council, and that their findings should be given due weight by the Planning and Zoning Commission as you consider this matter. Outside of the floodplain regulation concerns, the staff preference is that a conservation overlay district be put in place rather than a historic district. We feel it's a more appropriate tool that does not have that high administrative cost to the city in administering the district, and also on the property owners when it comes to applying for building projects. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have prior to opening the public hearing.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate all the information so far and comments back to the questions. At this point, we will ask any other commission members, do you have any questions or comments for city staff?
Question?
Sure.
I believe I read in the packet here that if this were approved, it would be the only local historic district in the city. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I have a question. If this were approved, would the city consider to look at all the building permits such that they were still in the floodplain and still had the 50% requirement?
We do not know how such things would be processed. We are not clear on how the federal floodplain regulations would be changed by this designation, nor how building proposals would be processed.
Let me rephrase that. Until you found out how it was going to be ruled upon, would you consider would you continue to look at these as the standard 50% rule?
Yes, has been our practice as to this point, and we would continue that practice until informed otherwise.
I know you're pursuing a definitive answer on this question of the 50% rule. Do you have any reasonable expectation of getting a definitive answer in any reasonable amount of time? And where I'm going with this is that if we have this piece of information that's out there that we're trying to get our hands on and we just don't have it yet, but we think we might in some reasonable amount of time, we should table this because we're trying to make a decision without all the information.
Okay, I'll try to address that. That the ruling of whether this designation would obtain relief from federal floodplain regulations is really not a matter of consideration by this body. It would be something if the district is being sought in order to achieve, relief from those regulations, that's not a finding or an item of consideration for formation of a local historic district. Formation of a local historic district should be built on whether the area is historic, meets the historic findings. The Historic Preservation Commission has ruled that it does. And whether the design guidelines are appropriate for the area and whether the boundaries and use of that tool is appropriate for the area. There's no, whether this body feels it's appropriate to vary from federal floodplain regulations type of finding built within that process. So I would discourage you from trying to rule on this based on whether you believe that the floodplain regulations should be varied. We don't have that authority.
I understand.
Regardless of the floodplain issue, my understanding of the establishment of a historic district is to aid in the preservation and or restoration of buildings within that district. Would not this proposal do that?
Yes, it would. There are a number of different tools available for achieving that, and that is where the staff recommendation focuses. There is a finding contained within the city code that the tools that the higher up on that tiered structure that a proposal is, it should receive a higher level of scrutiny for approval. And so that's really what the staff recommendation is focusing on, is that this is a very, very complex tool for an area that may not be necessary, that a conservation overlay district may be more appropriate.
And I guess that was that approach was proposed to the homeowners who put this forth as a historic district, and they rejected that, or?
All manner of things were discussed with the applicant prior to them submitting an application, but yes, that was included.
Okay, I'd like to revisit. I understand your comment about the floodplain shouldn't even be a consideration here because that's not why you create historic districts. But you also mentioned that it seemed to be one of the primary motivators for this request is the belief that they would get relief from this requirement. If it turns out that they won't, they may want to withdraw the request, because if it went through, they would be putting all kinds of restrictions on their property and not get the benefit that they wanted.
Maybe that's a question that we should ask the applicant. Yeah. Eric, do you have anything else?
No, I don't think so. Certainly be happy to answer any questions afterward. Thanks.
Any other questions for city staff at this point?
I want to know how that ended up in the floodplain. I just want to know why the federal government decided to be in the floodplain. Now, I'd heard a variety of stories that there was incentives to put it in there, but just to put that to rest, why is that in the floodplain?
Since 1990, I've known of 3, I believe, different floodplain maps. There was the 1980 floodplain development maps, then there was one in 2005, and then in 2012.
And was it based on observations?
They're
or
based
just
on hydrologic studies. A
From
number of different items are considered in the establishment of those.
by the same people that said that there wasn't going to flood down there at the ice arena? The same people made those judgments? Just wondering.
So I was just curious, when was the big culvert put in Weirs Creek along that route?
Which one are you referring to? The channel that's there? I know that when I went to school at Simonson, that was in place at that time. It's been there for a number of years. There's been parts of it that have been improved. I believe that's been a long time ago.
Are you wanting to date yourself, Shane?
The area, I believe the newest portion of that would have been done through the Lincoln University campus. I guess that would be to the south further, but I know that back a portion, there was areas of that was, I believe, in place when the highway went through around, Simonson and over by the expressway. So it's been before my time.
Yes, the 60s? Guess the 60s when that was channelized?
I think it was channelized whenever the Witten Expressway went in, which would be about 61, 62.
I was guessing 60s. I didn't know if Mr. Yarnell would have history
I'm not
on
that old. It
was. You are an engineer. We'll give you that from the engineering perspective.
That was channelized in the mid-60s, early to mid-60s, and then the Lincoln's portion was done
Was that in the 1980s, I believe?
late 80s, I believe.
If, let's say this went into place, somebody wanted to paint their brick, or they wanted to go against the recommendations of the Historical Society, they bring it to the Historical Society and they say, no, you can't. Where's the avenue for appeal there? Who do they go to? Is it Board of Adjustment, or is that us? Is that City Council?
It's a little unclear on that, Blake. Upon my review, I don't know that the Board of Adjustment has the authority to hear this, since it's a Chapter 8 issue and not a Chapter 35 zoning issue that would typically come as a variance. So my default answer would be there's always judicial review at the circuit court, and I fear that might be the avenue here, but I'd be happy to do a little more research into that and give you a better answer.
Any other questions by the commission for city staff? If not, we'll move along. Okay, at this point, we will move along to the applicant. In keeping with the last case, the applicant will be given 10 minutes to give your presentation. So when you come up, if you would, please give your name and address for the record. I would also like to state at this point that afterwards, just like the last case, we will ask if there is anyone that likes to speak for this case, against this case, or is neutral. And as city staff has outlined, each one of those will be given approximately 3 minutes. So at this point, if you would like to give us your name and address for the record, we'll get started.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Smith. I live at 1211 Elmarine. My husband and I own 2 properties in the proposed district at 612 and 614 East McCarty. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm here this evening to ask you to recommend our application for the creation of this local historic district and the design guidelines that are associated. I would agree with Mr. Deacon. I will go on record as saying that I don't think that this is the proper purview for this review of this application, maybe the design guidelines. You folks did review the Capitol Avenue design guidelines, and these are largely based upon those, except they're not as stringent as those. And as to the canal that goes through our neighborhood, that was built by the Corps of Engineers, and my information is it was in the 1960s, and that did mitigate flood damage. So people that lived there prior to that going in may have experienced more flooding, but since that canal has been put in, there has not been flooding in this district. Although the floodplain lines stay the same, it's still the 100-year floodplain, and every year that means 1% chance that we will experience flooding. In your packets, the staff states that the primary purpose of the local historic district is to serve as justification for enactment of building design regulations, but the benefits go well beyond that. And the city crafted or created these districts, or provided for the creation of the districts, because they recognize the many benefits that there are to historic districts. They go well beyond just that one simple statement. It is a vehicle for the revitalization of these older neighborhoods. That's primarily why. They provide for protection of property owner investments. They encourage a greater sense of design cohesiveness and historic text and historic aesthetic appeal. They're good for the environment because we are repurposing existing materials, and there's not those materials going into the landfill. It is the ultimate in recycling. They are a vehicle for education. They're a tangible link to the past, and by preserving the original buildings, you retain that sense of place, and you help preserve and raise awareness of the area's history. You've all read your packets, I presume, and read the history that's contained in there of this area, and we feel like that it is a significant area and worth preserving. Vibrant historic districts do attract business investments close by. There's a positive impact on the local economy through tourism. As you know, this is close to the Lafayette Exchange, and it is the corridor up to the prison redevelopment site. Being in a local historic district, it it enhances a sense of community within that district. It also gives residents a sense of pride in their properties, and that can lead to better maintenance of their properties. And finally, this gives communities a voice in their own future in a structured way. And I would say to that, a lot of talk has been made of the floodplain, and perhaps this is more heavily weighted to wanting relief of floodplain, the floodplain 50% rule. But residents right now accept that floodplain risk. We pay our higher insurance rates. If there was a flood tomorrow, there is no bailout for us. There's nothing in it for us. We're there because we want to be. We're fixing up our places because we want to. We like the neighborhood. It's a very convenient, nice location. It's a historic neighborhood, and it doesn't hurt anybody for us to be there. If we accept that risk, and we're not asking anything from the government if we get flooded out there. The staff report said that our application was heavily rooted in an attempt to obtain relief from floodplain regulations. Well, this application has merits on its own. It doesn't matter that we're in a floodplain. Everything in this packet shows that this application has merit. The history of the area, the design guidelines, these houses are all brick houses, brick and stone houses, over 100 years old, and they're worth saving. It's not a pristine, beautiful neighborhood like Forest Hill or Hazleton or El Marine, but we hope someday we can have a charming, revitalized district like that. I would like to point out the irony that property owners in the area, those houses are in far worse shape than many of the houses in our neighborhood. And if the city had their way, and actually I should back up here and say that our impetus for this historic district was because they wanted to create a green space in this neighborhood, which would require tearing down all of our houses. The same thing, there is decline in houses up on Capitol Avenue. Those property owners would get fair market value for their houses because of eminent domain. Now, we do not have eminent domain going on here. They would just have to wait till our property values sink to nothing. They'd buy them at a cheap rate and then tear them down. I want to speak a little more to the history. The staff report states that the general public would be hard-pressed to identify the proposed district as being a significant feature of Jefferson City history worthy preservation, while other areas of the city that are commonly cited as being historic do not benefit from an equal designation. The fact that this area is not generally recognized as historic is the very best reason to highlight it with this historic designation, to bring awareness to its history. If other areas do feel slighted, then they have the same opportunity as we do to bring an application to the city. As to the history of this area, this is about preserving the place that was part of the national phenomena of forced segregation. This neighborhood would not have existed except for that. This history fulfills one of the criteria in Section 8-44A1 of City Code. It, quote, its character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the community, county, state, or nation. There is an extensive history of this area in your packets. I hope you've read it. I'm not going to read it again to you.
You've got about 1:50.
Okay, I would just say that the city is concerned about the burden of this administration of this district. I'd say, well, whose ordinance is this? You folks created this, so maybe you made it too burdensome. So maybe if ours would be too burdensome, anybody else's would be burdensome too. So you need to consider that in your ordinance. With my remaining time, I just want to say that I think a lot of this ordeal boils down to a mistake the city made in 2009 when they bought 408 Lafayette, that is in the district. And they using HUD money, they bought it to rehab it and return it to low-income housing. They paid $55,000 for the house and then $25,000 more to put a roof on it. And then the market fell. The housing market collapsed. And I think it was pretty apparent that if they put any more money into this, they would never recoup their investments. Also, it appears that the floodlines might have been redrawn to put this into the floodplain, and HUD would not give them any more money to rehab it. The only thing the HUD would do would be to give them more money to tear it down. If they don't tear it down, that would take $25,000 more dollars. If they don't tear it down, then the HUD wants them to repay $78,000 of the money that they gave them to rehab this house in the first place. So I think that is kind of behind a lot of this controversy. And us taxpayers, that's still taxpayers' dollars, HUD money, over $100,000 in an empty lot on Lafayette. I think it's a poor expenditure of taxpayers' dollars. I would just like to conclude by saying that when it comes right down to it, I think this neighborhood and the taxpayers are paying the price for the city's mistake. 75% of the property owners support the creation of this district. It is the will of the property owners that should determine the fate of this neighborhood. Property owners and taxpayers have everything to lose, while the city saves $78,000, and that is a pittance compared to property owner losses.
Thank you. I appreciate you understanding our time constraints and giving us your testimony this evening. With that being said, I will ask the commission members if they have any questions for the applicant at this point.
Why did you choose the district over the conservation overlay? What's the proper term? Conservation overlay. Why did you choose the historic district over the conservation overlay?
I think we were looking for the best protection of our neighborhood. I think it would provide the best protection for our neighborhood.
Any other questions for the applicant at this point? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you all.
Okay, at this point, we will have open testimony. We will start with if anyone would like to speak in favor of this request. So it would be everyone who is in favor of this request. You have the opportunity to speak. As city staff mentioned earlier, we limit that to 3 minutes. I will be a little bit lenient. I would like to hear, most of your comments, but we don't want to go for a long time. So if you would, if there's anyone in the audience who would like to come up and speak in favor of this request, please come to the podium or sit at the chair there and state your name and address for the record, and we'll hear what you have to say.
My name's Steve D'Onofrio, and I live at 1302 Roseview, and I own a house at 618 East McCarty. And I did sign to say I was in favor of this, but I just want to give you an idea about this special flood hazard area. Flood insurance alone on my house, I called American Family, who I insure with, would cost me an additional $1,100 per year if I had to buy it. I own it outright. I don't have to, but if I sold the house, someone took a mortgage, they'd be required to pay that. Now, in 10 years, they would have paid $11,000. 20 years, $22,000. 100 years, they would have paid $110,000. That's a lot of money, and that's supposed to be protecting me for a $10,000 flood if you had one. And I think something needs to be done, and city staff has not really helped in any way as far as I'm concerned. These maps were models. They were models, and that paved channel drainage way, the new interchange, the houses that have been torn down have all resulted in less water runoff. And I think that drainage way, that paved channel drainage way, was built to prevent flooding and to handle the extra rains in the spring and in the fall. And I challenge anybody to find any of those houses that have flooded, that their basements have flooded, because you won't. And for a homeowner to have to pay $11,000 to $110,000 to save me, I'm sorry, that is not cost beneficial. And an MT2 possibly might get that area out of the special flood hazard area that it's in. And the factors that I talked about, the paved channel, the houses that have been removed, if you look at that interchange, instead of having concrete go all the way on the bottom, there are boulders that I think allow water to be absorbed so that it goes more slowly into that paved channel. And I'm kind of beside myself that I can't get any help. I've talked to councilmen, I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to city staff, and if you look at the letter of map amendment information that FEMA has, they say that those maps are based on models, and those maps went to the city for approval. And I think we made some mistakes there, because there are some areas that should have been in that area, and there are other areas that were included that should not be. And I just am asking you and any of the council members that are here, I think we need to look as hard as we can into getting that out of that special flood hazard area, and I think those mitigating factors that I brought up do make a difference. And I've read a lot of the federal regulations in 44 CFR or whatever it is, till I'm tired of looking at them. But that's the comment I had, and I'll answer any questions. And I would say one thing about the rule, if I could, real quick. I don't think that keeps you from making the improvements to your home. I think what it does is you either have to raise that home above that base flood elevation, or fill in the basement, or make it so that water can't get into your basement, correct? And I don't think that's been brought out. And but again, with those insurance premiums, how can you take a $50,000 to $70,000?
I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna cut you off.
Okay.
I want to set precedence here. I gave you a few minutes extra. Okay, don't run off. I think we have a question for you.
I have a comment. I agree with everything you just said, but having done going through two of those map reviews, it doesn't matter what we say.
What, and I maybe you know more than I do on this, but an MT2, do you know?
I don't know what that is.
Eric Landwehr had mentioned that to me, that he thought that there was a possibility that an MT2 might be the direction. I talked to someone at SEMA too, and I can't.
There's a way to, if you want to pay for a complete recalculation and model, you can prove them wrong, but you have to do that.
And the cost there, I would imagine, would exceed.
Every house that's in this place wouldn't come close to covering it.
Yeah.
I own a piece of property that's in a floodway, not a floodplain, but the floodway. And I understand what you're talking about very, very well. And these folks can do whatever they want, and it's not going to matter.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating, when you know it's never going to flood, and yet you're stuck. But that's when federal law tries to fix something for everybody in all the states, and they don't really have a handle on it. So anyway, I thank you for your time.
Thank you for yep. Just a minute. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, sir. Once again, I'll ask, in favor of this request, please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Doug, Doug Record, 1009 Fairmount Boulevard. I'm with the Historic Preservation Commission. Mary Shantz was here earlier. She's the chair of the commission, and she had put together some notes that I'm going to read. She had to leave to go to another meeting. A lot of what I'm saying, what her comments were, have already been said, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it. But in the May meeting, we sat through the testimony that was given, We read the report that was filed. We were impressed with the narrative on the history that they provided, from the Dr. Ross to the Lorenzo Green to the first African American graduating student at Jeff City High School. We were impressed and thought that it was significant, even though staff members don't necessarily agree with that statement. We heard testimony from residents who live there currently, from people who had lived there in the past, and they feel that it's important part to, put this local historic district down in that area. The Historic Preservation Commission voted on it. We passed it unanimously, and we just hope that you all will do the same.
Thank you, sir. Is there any questions? Thank you again. Appreciate it. Once again, I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to speak in favor of this request. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Mike Gorman, and I live at 305 Crest Avenue in Holt Summit, and I own the property at 608 East McCarty. And in regards to the position that this is being done to alleviate the 50% rule for the floods, I've owned the property for 14 years, and it wasn't until we started this that I even knew that 50% rule existed. So I was never told about it when I bought the property. And as this began, I learned about it because the Parks and Recreation bought the two houses next to me, and I called them to find out what their plans were. And they said, well, we're going to knock them down because our long-term plan is to get all of those houses and turn it into a big park. And I said, well, what about my house? What am I supposed to do with that? And that's when I started to find out, well, there's this rule, you can't improve it. So I'm thinking, well, it's going to decay, and so eventually they'll be able to buy it. And I said, well, do you want to buy it now for what it's worth? And they said, well, no, we just really want to pay the cost of the land. So, I'm in my 60s now, so I bought this property as an investment 14 years ago. And what it comes down to is I can't improve on it enough to maintain it, and the plan is within 20 years that Parks and Recreation will be able to buy it just for the price of the land, and there's not that much I can do about it. So I think doing this will help to preserve the historic district. It'll help me in my situation as well. And in the city's analysis, they said there are other ways for the structure in the area to obtain more flexibility from floodplain regulations, for example, by elevating the existing structures to a level above the base flood elevation. These houses are 110 years old, and that building down on Madison Street just collapsed the other day just because it was next to the stage, I think, where music was being performed. I've been all through this house. I've been in the walls, I've been in the floor, I've been in the attic. There's no way you can raise this house up in the air without it crumbling. I grew up in New Jersey, and I spent time back there after the Hurricane Sandy, and I saw what they went through to raise those houses down on the shore. And it's a massive undertaking, and if you tried to do that with these houses, it would destroy them structurally. They would not stand up to it. So I think that's my comments.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Is there any questions from the commission at this point? Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
I have handouts, so let me hand these out real quickly.
Again, if you would state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Jane Beadham at 1612 Payne Drive. I'm giving you my handouts and my full comments because I'm going to try and keep this brief and cover just a few of the highlights within our comments. The design guidelines, it's been mentioned that they were based on the Capitol Avenue Overlay District guidelines, which were approved by the City Council, and our changes apply only to the exteriors. The floodplain has been mentioned a lot. We don't believe it's really pertinent to the design guideline review process, but the 50% rule prohibits rehab in this area currently. There were a number of houses that were allowed to deteriorate to such a point they weren't habitable. And so when you buy a house for $20,000 and then try and put in electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, and a roof for $10,000, it doesn't cover it. And so the city will not issue a building permit that's over the 50% of whatever that established value is. So a lot of these houses are just sitting in limbo. People have bought them. They want to fix them up. They want to make them more presentable and livable, but they're not being allowed to do so by the city. Also, in Wares Creek, that big concrete ditch that we've talked about, done in the 70s, that has protected the area from over 50 years. And we've heard mention of hydrologic studies related to the floodplain. FEMA told us that the floodplain map revisions were based on information provided to them by the city, but we have yet to see in this last year one piece of paper that says anything about those studies. If they exist, we'd like to see them, but everything we've seen has been based on topographic information only, that base flood elevation number. And so that hasn't changed, of course, so the maps are based on that. But yet, the area hasn't flooded. We'd like to resolve that issue somehow. Under FEMA regulations, I just Googled city issues waiver for historic districts and floodplains, and I got a number of examples, and there's some screen grabs in your handout of different cities that have done just that. For example, Louisville, Kentucky, which is a river town like Jefferson City on the Ohio River, they have some low-lying areas that flood, and so what they've done is allowed their local historic districts, and they define a historic structure under the FEMA regulations as a locally designated historic property. And that's one of the things the city staff have, not been able to figure out, is if that meets the requirements for FEMA. Also, Jefferson City is a certified local government, certified by the State Historic Preservation Office, which has been certified by the Secretary of Interior as the agency for Missouri that does historic preservation efforts on behalf of the federal government. That's on their webpage, and you have a screen grab of their webpage saying that they are the certified agency. And you also have a screen grab that shows Jefferson City was listed as a certified local government in 2004. That is why Jefferson City has received a number of grants through the state program, because they are a certified local government. A local historic district is an addition to the inventory or listing of historic places in a community. And that's what they're talking about in the FEMA regulations. The question was asked that the overlay district, why didn't we go with the overlay district? Because first of all, that has not been mentioned in the last year of discussions with city staff. That's never been raised with us. When you look at the parts of the code, like Eric mentioned, there were 3 options listed in the code. The 2 conservation districts, which still appear on the city website, and then the local historic district. There's not anything in that section of the code that mentions overlay districts like Capitol Avenue. So we didn't consider that as an option. We went with the local historic district because that's what the code says. We had talked early on with FEMA, with the city administrator, and who had said that he thought the city could help with a letter of map amendment. That would have been our preference rather than a local historic district, but that didn't happen. The staff didn't want to go that way, so we went with the local historic district as a tool that we could use. Many smaller cities manage local historic districts just fine, even with smaller staff. So I think that can be dealt with somehow. Other surveys, there's been mention that other surveys have not listed this area as
I'm going to give you 20 more seconds, and you're running over your time.
All right. But if you look at the individual forms in those surveys, they say, yes, there's historic district potential in those areas. So those are my comments. I will entertain questions.
Is there any questions? Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Wynn Harrison. I live at 1916 County Road, State Route 00 in Holt Summit, and I have very little to say. All this paperwork and all these issues aside, if you look at or talk to people who have lived in this area or are familiar with this area, as I have been for some time, Randall Halsey was here earlier. He lives in this area. He said he's never seen a flood except when the creek was rip-rapped. Ever since the Corps of Engineers went with the HUD's MOR 45, the original housing and urban development down here, and put that
Channelized creek.
Thank you. The channelized creek, and there has not been a problem. That all aside, I've done a lot of renovations as a contractor around Jeff City, and I thought it was really interesting while we were rehabbing School Street. I could probably take all the other jobs that I've rehabbed over the years, and there's never had been more interest in people driving by and wanting to buy or rent that house when it was completed. So there was some issues or some questions raised earlier about the city's interest in this area. And I thought that was maybe somewhat indicative of the fact that maybe people are interested in this area. They're certainly not afraid of it, and would only be an asset to improve it. And I hope we can do that.
Okay. Don't leave just yet, in case someone has a question for you. Thank you. Is there any questions for Mr. Harrison at this point? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
If you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Tony Smith. I live at 1211 El Marine. My wife and I helped with Jane Beadham put this proposal together. We own properties at 612 and 614 McCarty. I sent you my comments earlier, so I will not read them. I'll just make a few summary notes. You know, the 50% rule, if I understand it right, was instituted in 2012 in the floodplain revisions by FEMA because of Sandy and Katrina had drained the treasury of FEMA. And you remember what happened in 95 and 93. Those properties across the river were bought out. But that money, it no longer exists. And so people will not be bought out, nor will they be helped if they're flooded. But the reason that 22 of us came together to propose this School Street district is we're trying to improve our properties in a historic way and keep them presentable and livable. Our daughter lives at the property at 612, and it's been featured as in the newspaper and gotten awards for its for the work we've done there. But it's this 50% rule. You know, if you were doing wiring, yes, or if you're doing plumbing, you can spend a lot of money. But the first thing we did was we got an estimate on drywall, $8,000. We did that ourselves. We bought the drywall, we put it up, we finished it. $600 is what I'm going to say. But it was a lot of work, all that old lathe and plaster. And the other thing was we got an estimate right away on tuck pointing, $14,000. Well, we bought the house for $25,000. So you can see right there, there's two things I wouldn't have to have a permit for, I don't believe, but I would have exceeded the 50% rule as it was set up in 2012. So we've done a lot of the work ourselves, and a lot of the other people are doing work themselves too, and they're not exceeding these guidelines. And you'd be amazed at the interior of some of these homes. Steve D'Onofrio didn't talk about what he had done inside his home when he came up here and talked about his issues. But inside that house, it's awesome. It's a really beautiful home inside. And a lot of these homes are very nice inside. But we'd like to improve the exteriors too. Now, we did that. And I got reassessed by the county. And the assessment went up 300%. So I'm paying plenty of taxes now. If these houses, we became aware that HPC asked us specifically, why are we wanting to have a historic district now? And the reason is, in early 2016, the city staff came before the HPC and said they and Parks and Rec own 5 of these properties. Of the 28 parcels, they own 5 of them. And they intended to take all 5 of them down. So we got concerned about the long-term plan, and as Mike Gorman states, we were not going to be given market value, and the long-term plan was to let our properties all depreciate. So how could we preserve a historic district and these homes under those kinds of circumstances? And that's why we got motivated to work on this project.
Thank you for your testimony. Does anyone have any questions?
As a point of clarification, the 50% rule has been in effect before 1990. I had to administer it in 1993 and 1995.
The 50% rule. Okay. That's good to know.
Well, and let me just ask a question here. So there's nothing in front of us here today that says that it's a guarantee that if this goes into effect that the floodplain regulations won't apply or anything like that. We don't know that that's a certainty. Knowing that it's uncertain, are you still in favor of putting these more onerous restrictions on the properties, on what you can and can't do. I mean, is that, this feels like a gamble to me. I mean, if you guys are the ones that want to gamble, okay, but it feels like a gamble to say we're going to put these, the harshest restrictions that we have on these homes on the off chance that we can get out of these FEMA regulations, or federal regulations.
Well, when you read the design guidelines, we're talking about the facade, right? The front of the house, keeping it historic. I don't know anybody that really is going to, and these are all brick houses for the most part, so people aren't going to be siding them. And the only house that's painted is 408, which is the house they want to demolish over on Lafayette. I don't see the restrictions that they're talking about, because we're not talking about around the rest of the structure, and we're not talking about the interior. But on the 50% improvement rule, we're talking about the whole thing.
Right.
That's the whole house. And what you can do if you had to do wiring or plumbing. You know, that's a much greater restriction, in my opinion.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Eric, for clarification, in your opinion, the regulations that are being proposed for this district, based on his testimony, is it only the front facade of these homes?
No, I don't believe it. I believe it applies to all facades. I think they're worded largely the greatest level of concern is the front facade, so the statement is not necessarily too off. But it is design features for the entire house. So.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in favor of this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. I'm seeing none. Now we will move on to, is there anyone that is opposed to this request? If you're opposed, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Just like those in favor, I'll give you 3 minutes or a little bit after.
I'm counting on it a little bit after, since that was a precedent. I am Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. I am the pastor of Quinn Chapel, AME Church, located at 415 Lafayette. I am opposed to this because those who did the application, who I have met with for over the past year, are seemingly historians and experts in Black history. And they have cited over and over again their desire to maintain the historic value of that community. And I too want to maintain the historic value of that community. But on behalf of tens of thousands of parishioners who have called Quinn Chapel home for the last 168 years, I find it very odd and actually hurtful that our church was not considered a part of it. If indeed the idea was to maintain Black history and to make sure that that was represented, it is really interesting that you were very intentional, the applicants were extremely intentional about leaving out the oldest Black entity in this city. We actually don't need anybody else to tell our story. My parishioners maintain that history and that story. Many of them, a few of them are here with me tonight, along with other members of the community who have been lifelong members of this neighborhood. It is interesting that you did not hear from any actual residents. You actually only heard from investors. I really think, besides this floodplain deal that they could get out of, it is an attempt to protect their investment. I am an investor too, so I certainly understand that, but I don't think decisions should be made by people who are outside of the community actually trying to make a decision for those who are inside the community. Most of you all know that our church was forced to move, and so one of the things that Ms. Smith and Ms. Beadham cited was that, well, you have a new building, but we are still 168 years old. We didn't intend to have a new building. building. MoDOT forced us to have a new building, and so that's why we have a new building. But even with that, our parishioners were extremely intentional about staying in this community that, yes, we were segregated to, but I also believe that this application is an attempt to actually exclude the very people who this community was built around, and the very people who actually created the history in this community. And so I am asking that this application be rejected, and that if there is a historical district, that it includes Quinn Chapel AME Church specifically, but I honestly think the corridor from Lincoln to Quinn Chapel should be excluded, because if we really want to maintain history, that's what we should do. Thank you.
You made the 3-minute time limit. You said you were going to go over.
I practiced that.
You did? We did a good job. Thank you for your testimony. Is there any questions at this point?
Isn't that actually your third location?
It is our third location, and it has always been in the same community, within walking distance of that community, intentionally. It is only our third location because of MoDOT. Twice.
So, did you present at the Historic Preservation
I
Commission also?
absolutely did. And there have been a couple of alternative facts here, like about where people lived and where they didn't live. It was not a unanimous vote because I was here. I did.
And do you think that designation of this as a historic district will not aid in the preservation of?
Absolutely not. What I actually believe is that, and so what I know to be true is that after a presentation about a proposed project that would actually bring commerce to this community, Ms. Beadham and Ms. Smith and Mr. Smith did the application. And so you'll hear more about that from another community member later. This is a community that it's been blighted. Part of why we decided to stay in the community was to preserve the history. If I am sitting in my office for 14 hours like I do most days, I can't even go out. I can't walk and get a cup of coffee or anything like that. And so what we need in this community is not just the preservation of ideas and history, but also commerce, so that the community can actually be more vibrant, to actually give us reparations for those 28 or so businesses that were taken from the African American community due to the 1962 Urban Renewal Plan. And so again, I'm a history buff. I was a history minor for one of my many degrees, but I don't have anything against a historic district. But again, if we are citing, as they did in their packet, the numerous number of people who were at Lincoln University, and it's almost like a Black History project, then you cannot leave us out of the project. And so if it goes forward, it should go forward, including Quinn Chapel. And I don't care how new the building is, we are still a stakeholder in this community, one of the oldest churches of any kind, and again, the oldest entity to be started by people of color.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Again, I'll ask anyone that would like to come forward and speak opposition. Please state your name and address for the record.
I am Reverend Kimberly Woodruff, 808 Jackson Street. I am a lifelong member of Quinn Chapel. I started attending Quinn Chapel when I was 2 weeks old, and I can attest to one of the alternate facts that was spoken. The old building before this one was also in the floodplain, and yes, it did flood on several occasions. It actually the basement became unusable because of water, not because of the '93 flood, but because of rain. I was at Simonson before you, and so that happened after that culvert was built. I find it very offensive that someone who, yes, they own property in the community, but they don't live there. I find it offensive that they didn't do their research enough to know that Quinn Chapel should be included in any kind of decision of that any area down there being made into a historical district. I've heard both sides, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm real curious about some things. I heard one of the applicants say that their main objective was to heighten the awareness of history. What have you done before, and what do you plan to do when this does not become an historical district? Do you still have plans to bring that awareness? Also, because of what I heard tonight, I have to ask, what's in it for the applicants? It's not the history. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Don't run off on me.
I'm not going anywhere.
Does anybody have any questions?
So, just one, so you're saying if Quinn Chapel had been included in the district, you would be in favor of it?
That is not what I said.
Well, okay.
No, sir.
So you still would not be in favor of it?
I did not say, I said, okay, so to make it clear for you, I didn't say that. But since you asked, what I want is for Quinn Chapel to be included. So many times in that community and in Jefferson City, the people who are actually stakeholders in those communities aren't even considered. I'm tired of us not being considered. I would have to get a clearer understanding of what the property owners want to gain, whether or not I would agree to what it is they want to do to make this district historical.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Sir, you've been sitting there kindly, quietly. Would you like to speak yet? Okay. Okay, that's fine. Please state your name and address for the record, sir.
I'm Glover's older brother. My name is Arthur Brown. I live at 714 Clark Avenue. I'm not here to speak against or for the historical district. I just want to clear up some facts. I was born and raised on Lafayette Street. I played in the creek before it was flooded. Before it was paved. In I don't know where Randy Halsey was at, but the creek, right across the street from his house, I saw a car washed down the street from the flood. My physical plant director lived on School Street. 3 houses down on the left-hand side. The grounds crew went down and helped clean up his basement. Coach Reed lived on the right-hand side of the street, 2 houses further down. He had flood damage. Leland Smith lived closer to the creek on the left-hand side. He had flood damage. Some other people live closer to the creek. They got water in the basements. Now, historically, I say what's historical about the district is during segregation, black people couldn't live on School Street. Lafayette Street and McCarty was the line. There were a few white people that lived on School Street, but when they tore down the buildings on Lafayette, they fled. That's when the black people moved in. So that's what's historic about it. That's all I've got to say.
Don't run off on me. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you, sir. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony, sir. Okay. Name and address for the record, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. My name is Glover Brown. I'm the executive director of the Friends of Lafayette Street in the Historic Foot District. What I just handed the chairman there was a handout, and I didn't know we weren't going to be able to make copies, so hopefully he'll disseminate that to you. As the director of the Friends of Lafayette Street, one of our objectives was it is believed that it is the goal to achieve and will instill the value and historical significance of the area. That's one of our main goals. Now, one of the reasons why I'm appearing tonight is I'm in accord with Reverend Gould. When they started to formulate this district, and if you look at the location map there, Quinn Chapel was it's obvious, was excluded from that district. And like she said, it's one of the oldest black entities in Jefferson City. The oldest. And it was excluded. Now, I heard Ms. Smith talk about 408 Lafayette Street. One of the things that we've been purporting in our discussions, we've had meetings with the city council members, we've had meetings with interested citizens in the community. We had proposed an economic development package for the corner of Lafayette and McCarty Street that would bring economic development to that area. We felt that, as the gentleman there said, if they were willing to gamble, so be it. But what we were going to offer was an economic development package to help enhance first the neighborhood, then the community, and then the city. We had meetings with 2 presidents at Lincoln University, and they were giving us the support because they felt this was something that was going to benefit the students, both from employment. Instead of having to walk to Missouri Boulevard or wherever, there would be employment opportunities. In the neighborhood, the trend now is for neighborhood-based businesses, where the neighborhood folk can walk and go have dinner, or they can go shop, do whatever they want to do. So we were going to bring economic development to that area. Ms. Smith brought up a point that I want to bring very clear. She felt that the city had made a mistake in buying 408. Well, in our proposal and our development plan, we're going to look at purchasing 408, thus eliminating that burden for the city. And again, offering economic development for that area. The other thing is that, and I'm losing my train of thought, is that back to the historic area. You know, in their packet for their application, they cited many dignitaries from Lincoln University that lived in the School Street area. As we brought out to them, a lot of those dignitaries had received their credentials before they even came to School Street, because that was one of the reasons why they were brought to Jefferson City, was to enhance Lincoln University as an academic strong point. And so that's the reason why they lived there, because they couldn't live anywhere else because of segregation. So I didn't want you all to be misled about this historic nature of what was going on Lafayette Street. Now I want to go on record. We are not in opposition to the historic district, but what we want is for you all to reject it as it is proposed now. Take it back to the drawing board. Let's do it right this time, because as I stated in my outline here, we're looking at creating the historic district that will include not just School Street. Let's go back and look at the historic area in Jefferson City that goes from Lafayette Street to Clark Avenue, from Dunklin to Miller Street.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds, sir.
Hey, good. And so all I'm saying is, at this point, reject this application as it stands now. Have them go back to the drawing board and look at, as the city had pointed out some of their deficiencies, let's look at including Quinn Chapel. Let's do it right this time, so we don't have to come back a second time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your testimony. Is there any questions? We have been sending around your paperwork. If we can get that back, and then we'll send it down this side before the meeting's over. Any questions at this point? Thank you for your testimony. Yep.
Oh.
Can Quinn Chapel be included in the historical, just because of the age of the building being brand new? Can it be?
Well, in their criteria for the nomination of the historic district, they chose to pick out certain criteria. The number one, it says the character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the community, county, state, and nation. So therefore, just because they're in a new building doesn't negate the fact that they are a historic part of the community.
Dale, for a bit of clarity on that, if you were asking, can a non-contributing building be included in the district? Yes. If you're asking, Can it be added to this application? No.
That's not, yeah, I'm not asking the second part, just the first part.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
of the age, I just figured historic, I'm thinking needs to be old, but it can be added to it.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else who would like to come up and speak in opposition to this request? If so, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is James Robinette Jr. I reside at 1675 County Road 390 in Callaway County, just south of Holt Summit. I come tonight representing the Jeff City branch of the NAACP and to speak in opposition to the application. During the applicant's testimony, she spoke about the application being the community voice, but when it's not inclusive of people in the community or a historical church in the community, then it's not a community voice. It might represent the property, some property owners, but it doesn't represent the community. So we're the Jeff City branch of the NAACP are opposed to the application until they become inclusive. If they have to start over to become inclusive, that's our position. But we're clearly, I mean, it's great they want to preserve the housing in that area by creating a historic district, but that has to be an inclusive effort, whether it's this historic approach or whether anything that goes on in Jeff City. We're pushing for inclusiveness, and so that's our position on this application tonight. Are there any questions?
Is there any questions?
And I'll just say one more thing. I've only been here 5 years. I was in Columbia 30 years prior. I grew up in St. Louis, but my dad graduated from Lincoln University back in the late chemistry major. He studied under Dr. Bird, and I distinctly remember him bringing me down here to visit Dr. Blue on Lafayette Street. And so he introduced me to Dr. Green and many other professors of his at Lincoln. And when he would come to visit me in Columbia, we would come down here to see Dr. Bird. So he would bring me to the homecomings, etc. But my point is that there has to be inclusiveness. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Again, is there any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak in opposition? If you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Not in opposition, ladies and gentlemen, members of the council.
Ma'am, I'm going to stop you. Would you give me your name and address for the record?
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Mrs. Donald Talbert, Christian name, Ouida S., O-U-I-D-A, initial S, last name Talbert, T-O-L-B-E-R-T, and I am a resident of 726 Lafayette Street, Jefferson City, Missouri.
Thank you.
This is not in opposition, ladies and gentlemen, but in support of inclusion. My late husband and I became tax member voting residents in this present location on Lafayette Street in the 1960s. It has been my advantage to enjoy the influence of Quinn Chapel Church, its faith-giving, faith supporting existence for such a length of time as you've heard. Historic preservation is our purpose here, and if what you have heard from the presenters of Quinn Chapel has not influenced you about what we mean, I am sure that if you think about it, it is historic preservation that we are concerned about. I want you to know that my reason is not just that. I hurry to say that I present this statement not as a member of Quinn Chapel. I hurry to say that because I don't want you to report to my pastor that I didn't support whatever church that is. But it is a real joy for me to stand with Quinn Chapel in this support of inclusion. They, as a group, that church as a community organization, has had such influence in the city of Jefferson, not just on Lafayette and Dunklin and other streets in the area. And I bring to you this statement as a non-member of Quinn Chapel, because through those years since 1960, I have observed its influence not just in our community, but for the entire city of Jefferson City. And so this statement comes not just as a support of historic preservation of that location, but the historic preservation of the entire city of Jefferson. Faithful leadership is what we observe from Quinn Chapel. And because Jefferson City is our home, we certainly support faithful membership, faithful influence given to the city of Jefferson by Quinn Chapel AME Church. Thank you.
Don't run off on me, ma'am. Might have questions for you. Thank you. Is there any questions? I brought you back for nothing, didn't I? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an announcement in behalf of convenience for our citizens here? I just found out that we no longer have water service in City Hall, so I cannot give you any alternatives to anything, but that's what that noise has been, and the water's turned off. So just, if anybody needs water in an emergency, I can get some downstairs, some bottled water, but I just want to let you know.
Okay.
And the restrooms don't work is what I'm
I was
trying to
getting ready
say.
I'm
Yes.
assuming the restrooms aren't
Yes,
working.
yes, yes.
Okay. So you probably shouldn't provide us with any water unless it's an emergency. And we won't say you did it on purpose. Okay, we will continue on with the meeting. With that being said, is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing none. The last one is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? If you so, please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Roger King. My address is 1205 North Park Avenue, Springfield, Missouri. And the chair permits, though I'm not a resident of the city, give me my 3 minutes. I think you'll know why I'm up here. My family moved here in 1970. My house, as I call it, in my hometown, as I call it, is at 901 Roland Court, just a short distance away from Lincoln University. When I was a kid and I got here, and I saw Weir's Creek, I said, that's the coolest bike path ever. Myself and Ted Bryant, my best friend, would just go zooming up and down those ramps, and also discover it was a great shortcut to downtown. But as I rode that creek and as I grew up in this community, I start to see things. I start to see the old houses. I start to see the history. I start to see the people that loved it so much. And I had to leave in 1993. We all know what happened then. My residence was at the corner of Broadway and McCarty. And I think I was the only official residence in town that got washed out. Since then, I've resided in Springfield for the past 35 years, and all but 2 of those years I've lived in what's known as the Midtown Neighborhood Historic District. 33 years I lived in this district in one form or another. I have seen the houses that have seemingly been blighted turned around overnight. I have seen a house that was evaluated at $50,000 sell for $350,000 just 2 years later. Now granted, most of these houses that are in that neighborhood are the Victorian area, 1880, 1890. My little bungalow was built in 1918 that I lived in up for a time. The benefits of an historic neighborhood in a community is massive. I can't even begin to list them. This city is going to celebrate its 200th anniversary in 2025, and it does not have an historic district? You're kidding me. Shame on you for letting that happen. All of these great neighborhoods from the Munich area to Capitol to the High Street corridor that you have had the opportunity to turn around and not let get this way have just slid by the wayside. Now, as Mr. Brown said a few minutes ago, this needs to be done right. This needs to be done correctly. The Planning and Zoning Commission can lead the way on this, so when 2025 comes around, we can say, look at this fantastic historic district that we have carved out of the middle of this city, stretching from Lafayette Street all the way to the United States Courthouse up by the prison. That's an amazing corridor of houses. Have you guys ever walked that street and seen some of these houses? Whaley's East End Drug has been there since, gosh, the beginning of time. They still serve cherry 7-Ups there if you want one. All these wonderful old brick houses in the neighborhood that you see up there can be turned around. And you'd be surprised what you can do with this brand new corridor you have going up from this interchange to the courthouse. So when people come through now, they don't say, hey, houses are ugly, let's tear them down and turn them into grass and trees. Instead, you can say, hey, this is a fantastic city that respects and knows its history. My recommendation would be to form a community-wide task force endorsed by the Planning and Zoning Commission to establish an historic district in Jefferson City, done the right way with all the stakeholders involved. No, I'm not from Jefferson City, but you can tell my heart is here. I just volunteer I actually came up here for just a few weeks to volunteer with a small group of kids with this volunteer corps. We just had a fantastic week at the Salvation Army because I care about this city. And I know I'm not the only one. Now is your time to get this right. And when that 200th anniversary come around, you should not be able to say, we're a city of 200 years old, but we don't care about it. We don't care about our history. We do care about our history. Let's get this done. Let's get it right. Thank you.
Don't run off on me. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Again, I'll ask, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. At this point, I'm seeing none. We will move on. We will actually close testimony at this point. I will ask city staff for their staff report.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if I wanted to give the applicant any opportunity for a follow-up or not. It is somewhat customary and within the rules of procedure to allow for a rebuttal.
You want to give your staff report first, or since you've already given it to her, are you comfortable?
Technically part of the public hearing, and so, you know, if they wish to speak, I'd say please reopen the hearing.
Okay. If we give the applicant a chance for rebuttal, we are or are not going to have rebuttal from the audience.
We typically allow that opportunity for both on issues that have had this much correspondence on it, or this much testimony. But it is at your discretion.
Does the commission have a preference whether or not we would like to have rebuttal from the applicant and or anyone in the audience speaking for or against or neutral? And then do we want to offer a time limit in case we want to do that? So I will open it up for quick discussion.
So without water is a bathroom break out of the question.
I think you've answered that question yourself. I guess if you're the first one in the restroom, you're okay. If you're second, you're in trouble. With that being said, I would like to entertain what the commission would like to do. I'd like for you all to make a decision whether or not you want to give a rebuttal time for the applicant and limit it to a certain amount of time. And then if we're going to do that, I think only fair, we do have to open it up to the floor. And based on the 10-minute time limit for the applicant, I think it ought to be a pendulum there about the same.
I have a question for staff because I don't recall. What's our normal, if we allow rebuttal time, what's that normal rebuttal time is?
I think we're going to go ahead and say that it's within the procedures to allow rebuttal time. I believe it's 3 minutes. There's a reason Ian's on our staff. He's very in tune with such things. And so it's really part of the procedures to allow the rebuttal.
So the rebuttal would be 3 minutes for the applicant. If we have testimony from the audience, what would that time frame be, please?
I think that's at your discretion.
Okay.
So.
Is there a representative for the applicant? I saw Ms. Beadham leave.
Ms. Smith's back there still.
Yes. Yes, Ms. Smith's here. So, so with that being said, I'll entertain how we want to handle this.
I think that we don't have to allow floor discussion, do we?
You do not.
After the rebuttal, we do not have to allow floor discussion.
Mr. Chairman, my thought is one person from each side and that's it. I mean, rebuttal, and then they choose if the applicant has their what they feel, and then they rebuttal of that, or else we're just going to have the same testimony over again.
We do have a leader. We have a leader. We can decide.
Neutral. Why don't you, Chris, formulate that, something that we're getting at, and then, or Jack, if you'd like to do that, formulate that a motion. Do we need a motion on this, or is it just more of commission talk?
It's procedural, Mr. Chairman. You do not need a motion.
Thank you.
If that clarifies the issue.
I think our recommendation then is, if I understood, each side you get the rebuttal, and everybody gets one time, and not everybody, but each
All right.
position.
Let's make it fair. Let's do it that way, as fair as we think. So what we're going to do is the applicant will get a 3-minute time frame, and we will have one applicant for the application, one order of testimony. We would like one person to testify for in favor of the application, if there is one. We'd like one person to testify in those in opposition, if there is one that would like to speak, and then we would like to have one that would like to speak that is neutral on the application. Everyone will get 3 minutes and 3 minutes alone. When the timer goes off, I would ask that you quit speaking. Fair enough?
But if they don't want to talk, they don't have to.
No, you don't have to talk. No. Great point. And we won't give your minutes to anybody else. So with that being said, I will ask if the applicant would like to have a rebuttal for 3 minutes. Name and address for the record, please.
After all that discussion, I almost have to, right?
Yep. Give me name and address for the record, please.
Jenny Smith, 1211 Elmarine. Okay, I want to apologize to Quinn Chapel. You are historic, and we fully recognize your importance to the community and the contribution to the community. And I truly am sorry that you're not included in the district. I think in our earlier conversations, which there were a couple, before the boundaries. And there might have, I only recall one conversation with you before we started seriously drawing our lines and getting our information together. But in that conversation, I recalled that you weren't in favor of this district. So it seemed kind of, it wasn't appropriate to ask them to be a part of a district that they expressed disfavor of. And also, they're not a contributing property because they're new. It's a new building. So these are, every other piece of property in this district is over 100 years old. And, but we do respect Quinn Chapel and its history and its contribution to the neighborhood. And I at this point, we cannot include them without starting from scratch. I would say that the size of this district is small, and I will tell you why. Because this is a massive project, and this would not have been possible if not for Jane Beadham, who did these sorts of proposals in her work with DNR. She wrote applications for National Register historic places applications. That's a big deal. It takes a lot of work, and it's very expensive. If you want to have your neighborhood to apply for this historic district, you can hardly do it because you wouldn't have the expert we had in Jane Beadham. I don't really know how another historic district can exist unless they have a lot of money to put into hiring a private consultant to do all of those architectural surveys that you saw in your packet. So that's why this is small. She had originally tried to do one for a much bigger area, but it's an onerous process. I would also like to say that I know my neighbors. I feel like I am part of that neighborhood. I know Mary, and I know Mike, I know Steve, I know Wynn Harrison. I know my neighbors. That is my neighborhood. And so I feel like I'm not an outsider. I'm an insider. And I feel like the history here,
I'm gonna cut you off.
It's not black history, it's white history too. It is Jefferson City history.
Okay, thank you. Don't run off on me. Any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Okay, next I will ask, is there anybody that would like to speak in favor of this request? Please come forward for the group of those that are in favor, and I'll give you 3 minutes. I'm seeing none. Are you coming forward for those in favor? Please do. Name and address for the record, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tammy Beshen, and I live at I have to forget now, I'm nervous, 728 Deer Creek Road in Jefferson City. I am also the president of the Historic City of Jefferson here in Jefferson City. I've been listening, I've been going to almost all of these meetings that have to do with School Street, 408 Lafayette, et cetera, because historic preservation is very important for Jefferson City, and they really lag behind, as one gentleman said, in really realizing it and recognizing their historic properties. I just have a couple of comments from what I heard today. Glover Brown mentioned economic development. That economic development does not have to fall in this district. It can fall out on the other boundaries, outside of the boundaries of this district, and still happen. Quinn Chapel, yes, it's very historic. I believe that, as was expressed, the building itself is not old, and that's probably why talks did not continue with them. But yes, they are definitely a historic part of this district. Also, these houses in this district are in jeopardy of demolition by neglect, basically, because as you have heard, the overall plan for the city has been to let them fall down so they can be knocked down and become green space. So there was kind of an urgency to protection for this district. Plus, newly, we called it Historic Preservation Ordinance that was passed in January, says that the only protection for our older properties is if the building is 100 years old or if it's in a local historic district, which has been pointed out, we don't have any. So that's about the only way we can protect the houses that still stand that are around 100 years old or over 100 years old for this community. And there are very stringent guidelines, and the city staff themselves have said those guidelines in the city code need to be revised, and I believe that that is being worked on. But because of the urgency of this district, it was felt that those that put together the application couldn't wait until that process was completed, because it took over 3 years just to get an ordinance passed, and by that time some of these houses may not be repairable. Thank you.
Excuse me. I mean, I was mentioned by name. Can I just retort to one point that she made
No, sir.
regarding me?
No, sir. We're not gonna get into that. I'm not gonna do that tonight. We're gonna stay on task and
I have a question for her.
yes, go ahead.
I apologize for
her.
taking time.
Yes.
I know. You said just now that these houses couldn't stand possibly, and I'm paraphrasing this, for another 3 years while you waited for the ordinance to be rewritten. Do you believe that that this will be able to allow that structural improvement?
I believe that that a lot of these homeowners are already doing structural improvements to the homes within the 50% guideline, or not knowing that there was a 50% guideline. But as was mentioned, it seems like the overall plan from the city, however it was going to happen, was that these properties, they want them to be green space to comply with the overall plan that was put back in place into the early 2000s, which is now well over 10 years old. And possibly that plan needs to be revisited for the desires of the current community.
Okay, but I believe you understand that probably this will not allow you to bypass that 50% rule.
That is very possible, but still the recognition should be there for this area. And it's a starting place. If there's some other areas around it that want to be, like they were saying, well, we need to be more inclusive. Well, it's starting small because we don't have anything now. So this at least would get that process started. And then if there's adjacent properties that perhaps include Quinn Chapel or some of the other areas there that feel that they want to be part of a historic district, then boundaries can be set up for those areas, and another historic district can be voted on and hopefully accepted by the City Council.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
May I make a point of clarification?
No. No.
On his question?
No.
Okay.
No, thank you. We will move on to those in opposition to this request. Again, one representative, 3 minutes.
Again, I am Reverend Cassandra Gould. I reside at 1521 Huff Street, 65101, the pastor of Quinn Chapel. You've heard my position. I do want to reference what Mrs. Smith said. It's not that I was against the historic preservation. I was against being left out of it. I have an email here that Ms. Smith wrote July 10th, 2017. She talked about the fact that she was disappointed that middle and upper class black people don't live in the neighborhood. As you know, this neighborhood is mostly owned by white landlords. And it goes on and on. I won't get into all the things that it goes on into. In addition to being the pastor of the church, I'm also the executive director of Missouri Faith Voices. And Missouri Faith Voices is, our headquarters is here. We have chapters across the state. But our role is to actually dismantle racism and white supremacy, and to really be a bridge between black, white, and people of color all across this state. And so I think that this project, in the way that it was done, in the aftermath of the presentation that Mr. Brown made, with the intentionality of leaving out again, the oldest black entity that was started by slaves, reeks of the past of Jefferson City and not the future of Jefferson City. And so what I'm asking again is that an inclusive project, a project that actually does not just raise up the voices of white landlords. That reminds me of the plantation system that my ancestors suffered under. But a project that actually includes the least of these, the voices of people of color who live in the community, who should have a say, people of color who go to my church, who live in that community, whether they're landowners or landlords or not. This project is about our past, not about our future.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Lastly, I'll ask, is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Again, you're speaking not in favor or not against, just speaking to this request. You're speaking for that whole segment of the audience. Again, I will give you 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Name and address for the record, please.
Roger King, 1205 North Park Avenue, Springfield, Missouri. 33 years living in a historic district. I'm not sure if any of you are aware about the dark history of Springfield as to truly why it's the only city of its size in the country and one of the that has 3%, some people think less than 3% black population. We have had our problems there, and it's been tough. Where I'm at in Midtown, however, is a very diverse, loving, and respectful community. But it took some time. There were areas that at first that Midtown didn't want to cover, but they did. The disparity in housing value ranges, like I said, from $350 up to $500,000, all the way down to my little $18,000 bungalow that I lived in. But it took a community to want to do it. The community does. But as Springfield can slowly overcome 3 men getting hung in the square, 3 innocent men getting hung in Park Central Square, then surely Jefferson City, with a much more diverse community, can decide the middle of our city is important. 200 years is coming around for this city, and it does not have a historic district. That's an amazing corridor going up Lafayette Street. I'm not sure if any of you ever driven around the neighborhood or seen the little tiny white church-looking building that's now a karate studio, or seen some of the little, or wonder where that long stone brick wall came from, or maybe walked by the cemetery. I mean, you're talking all the way from Immaculate Conception all the way over to past Lincoln, all the way up into the neighborhoods there you could take advantage of. You have to want to do this. You have to want to say, well, it might be more administrative costs. So what? This is your city coming up in 200 years, and it does not have an historic district. And right now you're getting an opportunity to do so with a whole room full of people that want to see it done in one form or another. And a historic district does not have to, every building does not have to be 100 years old. It has to be a district of historic significance. And you are talking all the way from, like I said, Lincoln University all the way up to the United States Courthouse now. That's an advantage that you must jump on while you have the opportunity, or the whole city's going to turn into falling down houses because you just didn't want to accept administrative costs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Don't run off on me.
Yes, sir.
I probably brought you back for nothing, but let me stay consistent. Does anyone have any questions for him? Thank you, sir. Okay. With that being completed, Eric, do you have any, or any other city staff have any comments to make?
No, nothing to add.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One item, point of clarification. The Historic Preservation Commission voted on this matter. Their vote was split into 2 parts, one for the formation of the district, one for the the recommendation on the design guidelines. The vote on the formation of the district was 4-2. It was not unanimous. The vote on the design guidelines was unanimous. Just that one point of clarification. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that the commission may have.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Do the commissioners have any questions for Eric or any of the other city staff at this point?
Eric, this is just like anything else where we don't have the power to accept or reject any proposals. We just make a recommendation, correct?
You're correct. On this proposal, you are a recommending body to the city council, and this item would go forward to the city council with your recommendation as well as the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation. The final decision-making body is the city council.
And what exactly is the extent of the restrictions that this area doing this, what they're asking for? What's the extent of the restrictions that we'd be putting on the homeowners then? I know we've gone through a few of them, like the facade, but I mean, we're talking about it being very restrictive, and I kind of want to get a really good idea of what we're talking about here.
Okay. It's restrictive in that the properties would be subject to a objective review process rather than a subjective type of review process. In other words, they would have to seek approval from a body who would make a decision based on what they believe is correct in terms of design in this case, rather than the subjective process of being able to open up the law, the city code, and be able to read exactly what they can and cannot do. And so that objective review process is a very restrictive type of thing. And outside of basically the PUD zoning districts, this, and in fact, it is in many respects more restrictive than even the PUD zoning districts. And so I believe that I would be correct in saying that this is the most restrictive type of district that could be established for an area.
If I might add, Blake, Eric asked me subjective or objective. We agreed that backwards. Sorry. Okay,
I'd like another piece of clarification, because I think what Blake said was very good. And it's staff's opinion that the only recourse they have, that the landowner would have if they turned down, was to go to court. Is that correct?
Because it's under Chapter 8 in our city code rather than Chapter 35, the zoning code, I will say it is unclear as to whether the Board of Adjustment would be the proper body that could hear a denial or a request to deviate from any of that, much like they would if it was a normal variance of a zoning request. It is safe to say that as of now, the way it stands, I believe that judicial review at the circuit court is the option, but again, I'd be happy to look into that and see if I can find something else out.
I have a question, Eric. How does this differ from Capitol Avenue, the restrictions on it?
And so the Capitol Avenue area, the Conservation Overlay District, is a subjective, objective review process. So a property owner within Capitol Avenue can open up the zoning code and see exactly what they can and cannot do. In this district, they would not be able to do that. They have to go in front of a board and seek approval.
So it seems to me that the city has been kind of against this, and you state you are against setting up this historic district. None of that seemed to have anything to do with the non-inclusion of Quinn Chapel or the black community in this development. If this is rejected and comes back with Quinn Chapel and a bigger community, would the staff, the city, be more in favor of it, or just as much against it as you seem to have been? And
so I think you're asking a lot of history-oriented type of, the historic portion of the application type of questions. And so there was a staff report prepared for the Historic Preservation Commission that is contained within your packets. However, the Historic Preservation Commission has already voted on this matter, and certainly it's important to recognize their findings on that subject. But to answer your question, within that staff report that was given to them, there were some concerns brought up within the staff report regarding the boundaries of the district, the relation to the larger area, and such. And so I think you can look at that application and if a new application were to address a lot of those concerns, then I think our staff report at the Historic Preservation Commission would be different. But again, the history is really not something that the Historic Preservation Commission has already ruled on that subject, and I think it's important for this body to recognize their findings.
Any other questions of city staff? Okay. At this point, we will entertain a motion. I think city staff has instructed us that typically we make a motion in favor and then vote on it. But I think in this situation, we are at liberty to make a motion almost any way we really want to.
I believe that's correct. I would say that you really cannot make a motion for denial. And the reason that rule is in place is so that you're not giving a positive vote for a denial. And it's really an item to ensure that there's clarity on the vote. I think if there were a neutral recommendation, that after discussion of the body wanted to provide a neutral recommendation, I believe that you have that power.
And being the chairman, I would like to try to stay as consistent as we could as possible with our motions. I think it gives clarity to all of us of how we normally run business, while I'll still entertain a motion of whatever the commission so chooses. So at this point, I will entertain a motion or discussion. So whenever this body feels, yes, sir.
I have a comment to make. I'm not
Okay,
ready to make a motion.
let's open it up for discussion, and then we'll move on. Let's open it up
I
for discussion.
truly believe that this was about saving the buildings, and I think this is the only option that Ms. Beadham and her group had. They were doing everything they can to save a few handful of buildings. The rest, almost the entire rest of Lafayette, take it on the other side of Dunklin, has been torn down. I understand Quinn's Chapel's dilemma, but that's a cultural district. I think if Ms. Beadham would have been tasked with that, it would have taken months, maybe years, to do all the history that is involved. I think she would welcome give them her expertise in helping establish a cultural district. She can't do it all. I mean, she worked her tail off up at Capitol Avenue. I don't know what we're going to do when she's gone. Mrs. Rozier's gone. I'm glad Mrs. Beadham stepped up. But I don't really think this is a black-white issue. I think this is a way to save those buildings, and it's the only way that they have to do it, and I'm going to vote in favor of it. I understand Quinn's Chapel. I think they can establish a cultural district from there through the entire area, but for right now, this is about the buildings. It's not about the culture. And I think the black history just came about because they're trying to save the buildings and the history of that area.
Any other discussion?
If a motion to be neutral is made, does it just go on to city council then? Or is it?
Well, if passed, then it would proceed to the city council with the neutral recommendation.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, at this point, I will ask the commission to make a motion. And of course, we need a second.
I'll move to be neutral for the creation of the School Street Local Historic District.
Any explanation?
Well, first of all, I question really appropriateness of our weighing in on this now that the historic district has said, you know, they approve it as a historic district. And given the non-inclusion of significant aspects of the district and surrounding area, I think we should be neutral.
Do we have a second, or if not, we will move on to another motion?
I think I'll second that, and just to add comment to it, I think this has been presented to us with the cultural aspect of the African American community, and it somewhat bothers me that it's being presented that way when I think in reality it's being used to prop up old buildings and to get out of federal regulations for people who own the property. But I still think that's an important thing to consider, is that those old buildings, there's historical significance for those buildings. I do have a bad taste in my mouth for the way it's presented with a packet full of black history. So for those reasons, I would say to send it up in a neutral manner.
So we have a motion, we have a second. We are going to do roll call, and we need, for clarification, we need a vote of, what's our vote need to be for, is it?
Simple majority. Yes. I would ask to make sure there's opportunity for any other discussion.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's 5. He's over there. He didn't question the boundary lines. I'm a little surprised. Okay, so with that being said, we need a vote of 5 in favor for this neutral motion. If it fails, we will have to come up with another motion. If it passes, we will deal with that. For clarification this evening, I'm going to ask that Ann do roll call. And then I guess I would have to do a tie if there is a tie. So I do not vote as chairman unless there is a tie, and I would be the tiebreaker. So,
okay.
If you will start.
Absolutely. Deacon?
Yes.
Dutoy?
No.
Lester?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Yes.
Marcus?
Yes.
Vaughn?
No.
Yarnell? And vote.
Yes.
That is 5 in favor and 3 opposed.
Okay, so the motion carries with 5 in favor and 3 opposed. The motion made by the Planning and Zoning Commission was to remain neutral. This will be forwarded to the City Council.
That is correct. It will be forwarded to the City Council. It will be a public hearing on the matter. That public hearing is scheduled for July 16th. That is a Monday at 6 p.m. in this room.
And it is a public hearing.
It is a public hearing, and anyone who has any comment on the application has the ability to voice those concerns. You can also send in written correspondence through either the planning division or the city clerk.
Okay, written correspondence, it would include emails as well.
Correct.
Very good. Okay, we appreciate everyone coming this evening. Appreciate your testimony, all your time you've spent on it. We are sending that up to the City Council with a neutral motion. We will move on to our next agenda item. It's other business. Eric, tell me you don't have a lot for staff updates.
Don't we have to do the second one?
What?
Design. For design.
Do we have a second motion?
I would interpret you to have just made a neutral recommendation on the entire thing.
Okay. 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 My apologies.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be a hard one to discuss.
I knew that. See, I didn't even have to think about it.
Other business? Do you have anything?
The planning and zoning cases from last month will be presented to the city council this coming Monday.
Very good.
This morning, actually, presented amendments to Chapter 3, the Advertising and Sign Code, to the Public Works and Planning Committee, and that is now being forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they'll be appearing on your agenda next month.
If I could I ask you guys to go out in the hallway if you're going to have open discussion? We're finishing our meeting. Okay. Eric, I couldn't hear you. Please.
I'm sorry. We are planning to bring some amendments to the Advertising and Sign Code to you for review and recommendation to the City Council. And so it's a pretty extensive write-up. So when you get your packets, I encourage you to read all 33 pages of the proposed amendments to the sign code, or the 4-page staff report that's attached to it.
Awesome.
We also hope to be moving forward with rezoning, some staff-initiated plans to rezone some of the neighborhood in the south side area that we've presented to you in the past. Hope to finalize that for you, to bring it for initial presentation to the Planning and Zoning Commission next month. And then if all is well at that point, bring it forward to the neighborhood for some public involvement.
So we should count on a meeting next month?
Yes.
Okay. Any applications from?
So far we have not received any. But.
Okay. Any other business this evening? I would like again to welcome you to our staff. Glad to have you. Sorry to keep you so long. We're normally not this long-winded, but we take them as they come. Anything from the commission? Hank, welcome aboard. Yeah, Hank. I'm sorry, gosh, Hank. Hank, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you were crazy enough to do this. Glad to have you. I've sat on other commissions with Hank, and wonderful to have you on board. We enjoy having you, and please try to make as many of them as you can. So we appreciate that. Anything else? We are adjourned. Thank you all.